And as I said before, you can't have a Bible alone church, which is the basis of all Protestantism. Although the real cause of the Protestant Reformation was not that teaching, but it was, this church is so rotten, this church is so removed from the gospel of Jesus Christ, we've got to reform it. And they were absolutely right. And every Catholic should get on his knees if you think that makes you humbler, and thank the Protestants for it. Because we didn't get around it till Vatican II. And then we didn't get around to one of the most important facets of true renewal and reform, namely ending the clerical state and the hierarchy. And the question is not going to go away. And younger people who are, like every younger generation, they're completely new. They don't know, because we haven't had Latin Mass for 42 years. They go to a church today. It's got nice modern glass. It's not in a theater form. It's a circular or octagonal like Eastern Rite Catholic churches used to be. It doesn't have to face the east. We're not a bunch of Muslims, you know. The glass church in a semicircle, or hopefully almost completely circle or octagonal, with good architecture, properly placing the furniture, is an expression of an egalitarian church. You know, it's not the priest church. We don't, even our decadent churches don't have communion rails anymore. The Methodist churches still have them because they broke away in 1600. We don't have communion rails, you know. And if we really wanted to celebrate Mass the way it should be, we'd have to have mammoth dining rooms, so everybody could sit down, have a meal, have Mass, and have fellowship and sistership as a consequence. But you can't do that anymore because we got all these Roman Catholic factories. The Baptists are right. I mean, they're always splitting apart for the wrong reason. But they have lots of nice little churches with 100 and 200 people. And then they elect their own leader. So in that, they get tinges of the gospel more correct than we do. Or if you go to a Free Will Baptist church way out in the country, you find out that whenever they come together, they have the Word, like we do, the liturgy of the Word. Then they have a prayer of thanksgiving, imitative of our Eucharistic prayer. And of course, because they get sidetracked, as all these denominations do, they got grape juice and little white sick hosts. I don't know how that represents bread, but loads of Catholic churches are back to host. And after they eat the Eucharist, after they eat the meal, then they eat the Eucharist and drink it. And then and before that, the first part is the washing of the feet. Every time they come to church, we do it once a year. And they justifiably, from John 13:17, call the washing of the feet, which is a symbol of sucking and being a sucker in the world, just wanting to be a servant, free servant, not a slave. There's no beauty in that. And then you eat a meal. You got to have fellowship, and people talk and laugh and drink in the most human manner at a meal. A convivium is the Latin word for meal, a lively coming together. And then you eat and drink the Eucharist. It's just so human. But we have very truncated Eucharist in our church, and putting a host. And why would you let a priest put a host on your tongue? First of all, you're supposed to have bread. That was a rule of after Vatican II, which they forgot very quickly, because it's hard to get 80 bread makers in these big parishes, which you need every weekend, but it's a necessity. And then passing out wine gets expensive. Well, too bad. To spend it on the central mystery, there's no excuse for that. So, and now we got this thing of people coming up to communion and bobbing their head. Is it Halloween? It ain't apple bobbing time. It's supposed to be meal time. You don't bob your head in the middle of a meal. That's cheap reverence. And now putting the priest back up, separate from the people, and not allowing the Eucharistic ministers who are co-equal to him and perhaps 50 times holier than he'll ever be. They got to wait till he's eaten and drunk his meal because he's more important. Horrible symbolism. Before, they used to come up, break the bread, pour the wine as co-equal ministers at Eucharist time. In a well-built church, you have one pulpit. The priest, when it's his turn, in the name of the community, he reads a prayer. It's called a collect. From the English word is collection. He collects, he's silent. He says, let us pray, and then he gets silent. So the people are supposed to make their petitions out of their daily lives or abnormal lives or terrifying lives or they're into that weekend, or disastrous lives and sad lives and wartime lives and prison lives, whatever. And then he collects them by uttering a prayer in their name. And we sit down, and then a reader, which in the future church will be called a reader, won't be called a lay reader, because there won't be any laity and clergy. We'll all be really equal. Comes up to that one pulpit, and the next reader, and then when it's time to sing between the two first readings, and other parts of the Mass, the cantor comes up, or the cantress. And because at that moment, they're presiding. The priest doesn't preside over the whole thing, or he shouldn't, the presbyter. So, and he's supposed to have been elected anyway, but there's no election. That system's all messed up. You send them off to a seminary to isolate them, make them celibate, I guess, and make them special. And then you appoint them to the communities, Well, that undermines community, and there is no priesthood in the New Testament, so I don't know what, it's just all off base. So, even in the Catholic Mass of today, since Vatican II, even though the new document, John Paul II was the worst pope in history to me, he tried to drag the church back to pre-Vatican II. And the priest is superior to the people. All kinds of bad teachings. I think innocently because of his experience under Stalin, his experience under the Germans, under Hitler, gave him sort of a suffering mentality, false humility. He died in public instead of going and dying privately away from us. But anyway, John Paul II brought a lot of that junk back. And now the priest is supreme. That's bad theology. And when the people come up at Mass and give out communion, now and then you see some people form a line, they only want to get it from the priest. There's lay people ruining renewal. If they were honest lay people and they knew they were priests, they'd take it from their mother-in-law, or the neighbor they had a fight with last week, and they're both at the 8 o'clock Mass. They're just not deep enough or understanding enough of their identity. Just like, we have all this boo-hooing over the sexual revolution. And I know lots of promiscuity, one-night stands and all that became rampant. But there was a good side to it. And that was people saw sex as not dirty, but one of the highest acts of the human race. God detailed in their bodies, psyches, subconscious. God invented, God designed, and for joy and for making more children to continue the human race, proliferation of the race. And, I know what we've done. We've brought something called the supernatural into our religion. Well, there is no such thing. Supernatural today means you're on a drug trip, guided drug trip, or you're into psychoanalysis, or you're into spooks, you're into Halloween, serious Halloween. Yeah. There's no supernatural. There's just the natural, us and God, and there's nothing else. So, and Karl Rahner said that 40 years ago, but we didn't put it into practice. So, all this mix-up about the structure of the church has led to a reversion of people, because once you have clergy and laity, then the laity practice the religion minimalistically, which they've been doing for centuries. They become uncommitted, which most of them are, and they can that removes from them all responsibility. When the sex scandal reached its heights on the paper every day and the TV, the lay people kept yelling, even the most educated and even the most powerful groups of Catholic lay people, New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Antonio, Texas, Miami, Florida, where there are millions of Catholics, they all kept saying, what are the bishops going to do about it? And the parents of the victim children, they were saying it instead of saying, what am I going to do about it? This priest violated my son or daughter and has messed them up for lives. And that's been documented. You know, hundreds of, millions of pages now documenting these cases of what sexual abuse did to the innocent, you know, by the holy man, you know. So that shows you how unholy they were, even though most of those priests were sexually repressed, ignorant, and power drunk. Just like rape people that aren't interested in sex, they just use it as a means to power, you know. So that whole power fight goes on and on and on, and it started in the early church. So it's just so sad that we've wandered away from the main question. So the main question is going to be, how you're not going to renew the church. You can put the Mass into English. You can have fan dancers. You can have the most beautiful music, and the most reggae music, or the funky music. You can have a funky Mass. It helps people get into the experience of the Eucharist. But unless you get into the structure and the governance of the church, it's all going to revert. It's already started. This Pope has said that everybody should have a Latin Mass in their parish, and they don't need to ask the bishop. And if the priest won't do it, they'll be to report it to Rome. Now, how does that differ from fascism? So you can see the fight is big, the fight is deep, the fight is honest, and it's a horrible responsibility to throw on people, but they've got to do something about it, or the same nonsense is going to continue for generation after generation. I'm exhausted.
All right.